And it's time now for our visit with Executive Vice President and General Manager Nick Caserio. Nick, great to see you. And here we are on our way to New York. But first, a review of the victory over the Denver Broncos. Another nail-biter, Nick.
Yeah, what is it? 8 of the last games have been one-score games. So the big thing, just found a way to finish the game. Good execution defensively there in the end. Took advantage of some turnover opportunities, and Jimmy made the play there at the end of the game. So situational football really all encompassed right there. So 2 minute, and then you get the ball into the red area, kind of end the game. And really, usually games will come down to one play. We've seen that in a lot of our games. We've seen that in other games around the league as well. We saw it the other day with the Jacksonville Cincinnati game. So this is what the league is. So you just want to put yourself in a position where you have an opportunity to win the game, hopefully, and if you can control it in the fourth quarter, that's the main objective.
We're the only AFC South team to finish a game in regulation. How about that?
Oh, yeah.
Titans, Colts overtime, Jags went overtime. Nick, along those lines, what's the thing you're most proud of in getting the win? I mean, you talked about a couple of key things, but what's the one thing you took out of there and went, you know what? Dang it, we need this against this team. What's the thing you're most proud of getting that win against Denver?
Yeah, well, we finished a big point of emphasis against Denver where they had taken the ball away as good as any team in the league over the last 4 to 5 games. So the fact that we didn't turn the ball over, they knocked it off us a few times, but we were able to get it back. But we had the advantage turnover-wise. We had 3 takeaways, no turnovers on offense. I'd say that's a huge accomplishment. It's a huge point of emphasis going into every game. Players were certainly conscious of it, and they took advantage of the opportunities we had them. So I'd say that the ability to take care of the football offensively, we talked about some of the explosive plays we talked about in the pregame on both sides of the ball. We gave a few up, but limited them for the most part, and we were able to make some offensively. To finish the game the way we did, I'd say that's more than anything. I think everybody is certainly happy and proud of what the team accomplished.
And how about adversity within the game, losing Tank Dell, which was a big blow, not only to the game plan, I would imagine, but the guys love Tank Dell and everything he brings to the table on and off the field.
Yeah, we all love Tank. I think Tank is the ultimate embodiment of what we want a Houston Texan football player to look like, to be like, the way he cares about football, his competitiveness, his toughness, his team-first mindset and mentality, and he's a good football player. So when you factor all of those things, he's got a great personality. He's a great kid. You know, we all love him. We certainly wish him well in his recovery, and we're going to be here to support him like we would anybody else.
Nico, 9 catches, 191 yards, 1 touchdown. We've really seen him kind of blossom this year. What's been kind of biggest aspect for Nico that really has kind of set him on a course that he's on this year?
Yeah, really the big thing is just consistency and confidence, just in self-confidence more than anything else. And from the time that we drafted him to where he is now, he's put in a lot of work. He's really grown and developed physically, mentally, from a maturity standpoint. When you go back and kind of look at his history, he didn't play football in 2020. He sat out the year, so he basically missed a year of football. Then he went to the Senior Bowl. He was probably a little bit overweight, a little bigger. Then we took him in 21, saw some glimpses, saw some flashes, and that continued to 22. He really worked hard in the offseason, very diligent with his approach, is able to take some of the things that we showed him. Here are some areas that you can improve. Ben's done a phenomenal job with him from start to finish. And Nico has really committed himself to being a good football player. And then he's gone out there and he's performed and made plays. Anytime you do that, you develop confidence. And I think the biggest difference with him probably this year relative to previous years is what he's been able to do with the ball in his hands. Yeah. I mean, he's a big, strong player. Sometimes he didn't always play to his size, but he's played more to his size. And when he has the ball in his hands, he's difficult to tackle. We saw that in the end-of-half play against Jacksonville. We saw it here on the long completion here the other day when he broke a tackle or two and was able to gain extra yards. So we talk about gaining yards after the catch, and you've seen multiple examples of that from Nico this season. But Nico's a great kid, works really hard, cares a lot about football, he's a good teammate, so we're certainly happy that he's here.
He's part of your first draft class here and the latest draft class doing some really great things, Nick. But Jimmy Ward comes up with the big play at the end as well. And can you discuss the way this whole thing has been put together in the offseason? So many young players, but you did sprinkle in those key free agent acquisitions, those veterans who are really helping the team as well. It's a good mix.
Well, appreciate that. I mean, we put a lot of time, a lot of effort from a lot of different people, but I think we were very purposeful with how we constructed the team, understanding there's, in the end, you want to probably have a balance between younger players and some veteran players that come from winning programs. Specific to Jimmy, Jimmy's brought tremendous leadership and toughness and personality to this football team, and a lot of players feed off of him. So there's the team building is not an exact science. So you understand each year you're going to probably draft X number of players. So you're going to have a certain number of younger players that come onto your team. We've talked about this. You're probably going to have 25, 30% of the existing team that turns over, players who aren't under contract, players are going to be free agents. So you're going to have to replace them. So we've talked about this. It's like a little bit of a puzzle, and you're trying to piece it together. It doesn't always work perfectly, but you're trying to get some balance of younger players and some veteran players that have some experience, that have been associated with winning programs, because they have an understanding of what good football looks like and what it takes to be successful. And then you complement that or bring in younger players that have the same mindset, and you put that together. And in the end, it's about the players, and it's about them relying on each other on a consistent basis, because in the end, it's 11 players on offense, 11 on defense, and they have each other. They don't really have anybody else running on the field.
Nick, I'm always enamored when the concept and the talk of Derek Stingley Jr. comes up, because you can look at Sting and go, that's what a defensive back, a cornerback in this league is supposed to look like. I mean, he's got every physical attribute, but it feels like his football knowledge, his football IQ is pretty darn high as well. How, when you're evaluating not just Sting, but every player, how do you kind of get a sense for how football intelligent a prospect, a draft pick is?
No, it's a great question, John. It's difficult, and what you have to do is you have to combine what you see physically on tape, how a player plays. Does he see things? Does he process information? Is he in the right spots? Does he make the right decision? And then as you gather your background information about how the player learns, how he applies concepts, how does he study, what's his work ethic, then you try to have to marry the two together and to come to a conclusion to say, well, this is what we think we have. So a lot of that goes on behind the scenes, and it's very individualized in certain positions. And everybody has a different personality. Sure. Some players learn better than others, but do you understand concepts? Defensively, do you understand how you fit within the defense? You understand what the offense is trying to do. Are you in the right spot? Can you react to what you see? Defense is a very reactionary, I would say, game. So you have to be able to anticipate what's going to happen. So sometimes you don't know what they're being told or what they're being coached to do. Right. So part of our job is to interpret that and then go back and say, okay, that makes sense. All right, so then do they have an appetite for learning? Are they coachable? And they're able going to take concepts and be able to apply them on a regular basis. So that's where a lot of the off-season study goes into, and where we try to gather as much information as possible and make an assessment about what we think the player possesses.
It has to be the most zen, satisfying moment ever to have your third overall pick tip a ball that the third overall pick from last year intercepts. I don't know how you're going to respond to that.
It's probably
Nick,
coincidence more than anything else. But.
But that was pretty awesome to see. I feel like Chris Farley right now. That was awesome.
Yeah, no, it was two good football players making, I would say, two instinctive plays. I think from Will's perspective, it was a three-step drop, so you're probably not going to be able to get to the quarterback. So what's the next thing you're taught to do is try to get your hands in the passing lane to try to deflect or alter the ball. And he just so happened to get his hand on the football, and Sting was able to really make an adjustment to a ball back to his inside. He was driving on an outcut, probably going to come up, make the tackle, and make it 2nd and 4, whatever it was, and then the ability to react in a split second to the trajectory of the ball. That wasn't really an easy catch to make. So it just speaks to, I'd say, kind of like we just talked about, like their level of awareness and instinctiveness, and then combine that with Sting's ball skills and finish the play. And that ended up being really a big play in the game because it was a short field, and points are at a premium, especially in that game.
Yeah, remember when you drafted him? That was awesome. That was really cool. Yeah, Chris Farley here would have done something like that. All right, Sleep Broncos behind. It's a good win, 7-5. Games in December. You got a lot of big ones coming up. The biggest one, obviously, is the next one. That's the New York Jets in New Jersey. Nick, it's a really interesting team when you just look at everything that goes on. What are your thoughts about the Jets? What's the scouting report on the Jets?
Yeah, I'd say really a lot of good football players littered throughout the roster. I mean, Joe and Robert have done a good job of adding players to the team. The strength of their team has been on the defensive side of the ball, so they're one of the top defenses that we're going to face. They're very good in the front. They really go 8-9 deep in the front with two really good linebackers. I mean, CJ and Quincy are outstanding players. They really complement each other very well. They're kind of a nickel defense, so they've used some 3 safety looks, depending if it's Ashton Davis. They've used him kind of in the big nickel, and then Michael Carter has really been the slot corner. And then, Sauce has obviously made a big impact on their team. And then really they drafted Sauce. The same year they drafted Sauce, they signed DJ Reed in free agency. And those have really strengthened and solidified what they do in a perimeter defense. And at safety, they've had some moving parts, but Whitehead has really emerged and done a nice job for them. And Adams has kind of earned the job. But they put a lot of stress and they really tax you offensively. It's Quincy's brother, Big Q, is a problem on the inside part. I mean, Quinn Williams is as good a defensive player there is in the league. And then they really roll the edge players through. So they present a lot. I think they're, top 10 in a number of different categories. They're good in the red area. So they've been a good defensive team, and they've been in 7 one-score games when you go back and see that. So they've been a competitive team. And offensively, you really have, I would say, 2 explosive playmakers in Wilson and Breece Hall. Yep. So anytime that they touch the ball, they can be a problem. They can be a factor. So they've had some moving parts at quarterback, going back to Aaron and what happened to him. And then Zach has had his moments. Zach's a talented player. He's a skilled thrower. He had a couple throws in a Raider game that really made you go, whoa, this kid's pretty talented. I think they're just looking for overall consistency in what they're trying to do. So, and in the kicking game, they've done a good job. Zerline's kicked the ball well. Gibson, they've gotten good return out of Gibson, the Stephen F. kid. So, I mean, it's a good football team with a lot of talented players, and they've been in 7 one-score games. So we're going to have to play good football in order to come out with a W. It's going to certainly be a big challenge. On the road, there's probably going to be some elements, potentially, it looks like, with the weather. So we just have to prepare, try to have a good week, and go up there with the right mindset and try to get a good win against a good football team.
Well, Johnny mentioned big games. Here we are, well after Thanksgiving now, into December, and down the stretch they come. Do games to you, when you're reviewing them on tape, look different this time of year in intensity from, say, a game in September? Because it feels different, but is it different as you view things?
See, generally speaking, it's just an overall greater sense of urgency because everybody kind of realizes what's at stake. You have less opportunities. We have 5 regular season games remaining. And if you're in a position at this time of year, you're just trying to give yourself an opportunity in the next week to play in a more meaningful game. So I think there's heightened awareness, there's heightened level of just overall urgency, just understanding that the clock is ticking here and potentially, you're going to run out of time. So I think the key is just to focus on the task at hand, which is the Jets this week. Try to have a good week. Try to prepare, try to get ready to go, and then whatever the outcome is the game, be ready to flip the page and go to the next team. But this time of year, when you're playing meaningful games in September, it's certainly where you want to be. It doesn't guarantee you anything because ultimately how you perform is going to dictate whatever you get in return.
Nick, you brought up the quarterback situation. Don't think we're going to see Aaron Rodgers, but now it's Tim Boyle, it's Zach Wilson. How really does that affect the preparation, the fact that you're not totally 100% sure? Maybe they're not sure. I don't know about who's going to play quarterback.
Yeah, I think you have to understand just generally schematically how they've tried to play, what are some of the things that you're trying to emphasize, and then it goes back to the individual players. What are some of the strengths? What do they do well? And they may try to play a certain way to cater to the strengths of whoever those players are. So even at the running back position, I mean, there's been talk potentially Dalvin might have a more increased role, but you're talking about a guy who's been a habitual 1,000-yard rusher, so who's good with the ball in his hands. So you prepare for the scheme, you understand what they're trying to do, and then you also understand the players. So when they get in the game, you have an idea of maybe how they're going to use them, and maybe there's something specific to that player, which we saw that even going back to Denver with McLaughlin. When McLaughlin was in the game, there's certain things that they ran with him that they necessarily didn't run with Javonte. So that's part of the ebb and flow, just understanding your opponent and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each player.
Back to this time of year kind of thing with the players and the sports science guys that you have and the way you evaluate how players' bodies are this time of year. Can you say something about that and what you observe and how you take care of those things?
No, absolutely. I'd say this time of year, I don't want to say it becomes critically important, but what you're trying to do is making sure that on Sunday you have a fresh football team. So what does the information tell us? Do we have to make an adjustment, a modification of practice? Then there might be an application of that. So whatever we have to do to ensure the player's optimum performance on Sunday, that's where that resource can become valuable. So we meet each day. They give us the information each day. They give it to D'Amico, and then D'Amico can take the information and figure out what's the best thing for the players. What do we have to do to get the player to the game so when they go out there on Sunday? It's a very taxing – what they do on Sundays is very taxing, and the ability to recover. It takes, 48 hours typically to recover. So what do we have to do to put the players in the best position? Like this time of year, that's the most important thing.
Nick, I think last week we may have missed the announcement by a day or so, and that was Derek Barnett and claiming him waivers and bringing him here to the roster. What was kind of your thought about bringing Derek? And 27 years old, but has had some injury issues, and then obviously the Eagles have got a loaded edge area, and so he's available. Your thoughts about Derek Barnett?
Yeah, even though he's a younger player, like you mentioned, he has a lot of experience. So he's played in a similar front, had a little bit of a background with Coach Burke. So some of the things that we were doing defensively. So as we looked at our depth, just kind of reacting to, what happened to Dylan Horton in his situation. So this time of year, you're just looking, if there's an opportunity to add a player, then potentially you could plug in some capacity or role. So I'd say that was the impetus behind the acquisition of Derek more than anything else. And Derek's been productive when he's had opportunities. His play time, to your point, had been decreased a little bit in Philly because they have a lot of other players that they're utilizing. So it was kind of worked out for both parties. They let him go. We were able to put in a claim for him, and he played 15 snaps or whatever it was on Sunday. So we'll see how it goes this week.
Well, the tight end position is so interesting because earlier in the season, you got Dalton Schultz and Tegan Quatoriano, and then there you are playing the Denver Broncos in a huge game. You got Brevin back from injury. I know he's been back. Eric Saubert, who was playing for the Broncos against the Texans last year. That's the NFL for you. But what about the tight end position, Nick, and Brevin specifically, what he can do for the team?
Yeah, Brevin's really had a good attitude. He's dealt with some ups and downs, so he's been kind of in and out of the lineup, and he's had some injuries that have curtailed some of his progress, but he cares a lot about football. He worked really hard. And I think you're starting to see some of his work kind of come to fruition, and to be able to go out there and have some production, it develops a little bit. It's kind of like we were talking about with Nico. You just develop a little bit of confidence in your ability to actually do it and help the team. So when Brevin's had opportunities, he's taken advantage of them. We saw that earlier in the year against Jacksonville. And, even he had the touchdown catch against Blitz Zero. So when Brevin's been on the field, he's had productive plays. The big thing with Brevin is just doing it consistently week after week, day after day. And he was able to come through and make some plays for us that helped us win on Sunday. There's no question about it.
Nick, this might be an odd question, but I happened to see a transaction for the Jets the other day that caught my eye, and it was they signed Bruce Hector to their practice squad. So it's a guy that had been here for a few days, he's been here for weeks or whatever the case might be. I guess the question is, how do you kind of protect your proprietary stuff?
Yeah, it's a $20,000 question. I think every team has to deal with it.
Yeah.
So this time of year, you're really dealing week to week, and it's a little bit more opponent specific. So you have the core of what you've kind of installed in the spring and in training camp. So the reality is you have players that switch teams. You have coaches that switch teams. You might have a general understanding, maybe some of the principles and concepts, but ultimately it comes down to the performance on the field. So I think sometimes probably gets a little bit overrated, the impact that it actually could have. But I think more than anything, his familiarity with the system in their front. He's been on and off their roster at different points as well. So I think it just speaks to their depth on the defensive line, just add another body that potentially could give them some snaps in a specific role.
All right, some New York questions here, Nick. It's a big game for the traveling Texans. Big groups going up there.
Don't
to
ask
watch
me where to go.
Yeah. What are the hot spots, Nick? Clubbing. But what about, have you ever been to a Broadway show, for instance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have. My wife and I went. What did we go see? Yes, we have been. We made a. We'd actually try to make a trip or two to Times Square and go watch a show.
Oh, good.
And then wrap a meal around it. So I do have a life. That's people find that hard to believe. But it was a lot of fun when we were dating, when we were in early stages of our relationship. Kind of something that was fun to do.
Okay, I'm gonna ask this because I know that Sean Pendergast is listening, so I'm gonna ask: have you ever gone to a wrestling event, Madison Square Garden, or in New York?
I have not. I have been to a wrestling match in Cleveland.
Okay.
When I was at John Carroll.
Yeah.
I think at the time it was Gund Arena, but I have attended, not in New York,
Sean
not
hearing
Madison
this,
Square Garden.
Sean hearing this is going to take you to an event. I guarantee you he's going to make this happen.
Maybe not Saturday night.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Not Saturday night.
And when you mentioned Sean, I thought maybe you were going to go Sopranos. Have you ever seen The Sopranos? Did you like it?
I have. I know this is almost blasphemous, but I'm not a big fan of
The gangster stuff?
just the overall.
The
That's not
family,
my
the
personality,
genre.
even though my Italian roots would suggest otherwise.
Yeah.
But
Sinatra, maybe?
you can't go wrong with Sinatra. There's no question about it.
Very good. Nick, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, guys.